Again, thank you all for being here. My name is Kristen Hope. I work with Terre des Hommes, which is a Swiss child protection agency working on promoting access to justice for children and young people across the world in over 35 countries. And it's such a pleasure to be here today with colleagues of mine, including Cedric and others who are in the room from Terre des Hommes, and brilliant partners who many of whom I've had the pleasure and privilege of working alongside for many years in working on increasing children's access to justice, and particularly in also ensuring that when we talk about justice for all, we talk about justice for children as well. Today, as I said, we have the pleasure of this wonderful panel who I will introduce, and we will also be joined remotely by some more members of the child justice community who cannot be physically with us in the room today, who've sent some videos as well. So we will be bringing in their views and perspectives, and we also hope to open up to a Q&A as well through the discussion. So to kick us started, to get us started, to kick us off, I will introduce our panelists. We are very privileged to have with us today on the panel Shahid Koji. I apologize for my terrible pronunciation, who is from the Office of the Attorney General in the Ministry of Justice of Sierra Leone. Thank you so much for being with us today, Shahid. We also have Angela Vasile, who is a youth advocate and who I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years. Thank you, Angela. We have also Ton Liefard, who is Professor of Children's Rights and Vice Dean of the Leiden School of Law. Welcome, Ton. We have Professor Jennifer Davidson, who's the Executive Director of the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. And we also have Vino Lucero, who is a young justice leader, a member of the group of young people that was just launched today before lunch in a fantastic session as part of the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Societies. Can we just give our panelists a warm welcome? Thanks to you all. So some of you who arrived earlier, we asked you to also share what brings you here to this session today. And that's the first question that I would like to ask our panelists. What has brought you to the session today to speak about children's access to justice? Shahid, over to you.
All right, thank you so much for having me here. I'm Shahid. I'm from the Office of the Attorney General, Minister of Justice from Sierra Leone. This is my third time in The Hague, and each time we come here, we're discussing access to justice. But today I'm here because there is a different dimension to it. You know, we're discussing access to justice for children. I'm here basically to help the clarion call of having a segment clearly specified that in as much as we want access to justice, in order to meet the SDG 16, we have to focus and be very specific on the justice needs of children. So we here, as a government representative, I'm here to basically follow the call of the justice community to include justice needs so that children's justice issues are not discriminated, or we maintain equal access to justice for all children. And briefly, I'm coming from a post-conflict nation, a very small country of about 8 million people. We had a massive civil war, which lasted for 11 years. And interestingly, children were recruited as child soldiers. And one of the recommendations, so one of the issues that they found out when they constituted the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that justice was not dispelled and that children were not considered. There wasn't any provision or any specific justice needs for children, so it became really easier for children to be recruited and be part of the conflict. I think that's really one of the effects of not paying attention to the justice needs of children. And then it's also a problem when you do not include children in the discussion at the outset. So for us, and being part of the Justice Action Coalition, it's really a reminder that in as much as we work as a government institution, we should be able to voice out those justice needs. We should be able to bring children to the fore, and then we should make sure that their voices are heard. And these are the discussions that will develop policy that government would help to implement, that will make sure that children are supported and that we achieve 2030 agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shahid. Angela, what brings you to the table today to have this conversation with us?
Thank you. I'm here at the table today because as a child, I was included in the justice system. I was not at fault. I was a child that had divorced parents, but things were worse in my family that the justice system knew, and I'm pretty sure that if they would had taken in consideration the words of a child, they will had did a better job with helping my mother, who is mentally ill and was extremely abusive with me and my father, to the point of becoming a danger to our life. So I am here to use my own story, my own power, to make sure that future children will not be in my position, and they will be able to speak when they want to save themselves and their own families.
Thank you, Angela. After many years of working with you, I'm humbled constantly by the way that you use your voice to speak truth to power. Ton, thank you for being here. And
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here, among others, to be part in a conversation about children's access to justice together with Angela. And I think that is touching upon the very core of our, assignment altogether, is that we have to rethink how we engage with justice and children. And I think we have to rethink in a very fundamental manner. Access to justice, in my view, and I'm just a modest academic, but focused entirely on children's rights, is really about accountability, as you all know. But for children, accountability is extremely meaningful, extremely important, but it's also implying that we need to include children in our accountability mechanisms. And that's why I'm here today, is to stimulate and also help that conversation. And I remember that we were here 3 years ago and children were not part of the conversation. And that is, I think, telling. And it's showing that although access to justice is on our minds for quite a long time, access to justice for children is relatively new. And it really requires our exploration together. But we have to do that together with those who have experienced justice and who are actually at the very heart of our concerns and minds. And I've worked a lot on children and access to justice and child-friendly justice, and actually the further we get, the more uncomfortable I become. Because I think we have to rethink. We really have to rethink. We are constantly trying to adjust a system that is not meant to serve children. It's meant to do something else. And I think that is something that we have to talk about. So I'm very glad to be in the conversation again with you, but also with you all. So thank you for having me.
thank you so much, Ton. Jennifer.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So why is this important to me? I just will briefly say that when we think about children in the context of justice, I think we're often overlooking the disproportionate impact of injustices on children. So when we're thinking about justice for all and the many injustices that we've been hearing about through the conference today and that many of us are actively involved with, sometimes we lose sight of the disproportionate impact of all injustices on children, whether it's the impact of environmental justice and the environment on children's growing bodies is greater than on an adult, right through to the impact of a child whose mother might be imprisoned and a child is separated from his or her mother. So there's so many issues that we are all concerned about with justice for all, but when we're thinking about children, there's a disproportionate impact on them. However, there's not the equivalent disproportionate investment of finances, of public resources, of time, and of attention on children as there ought to be. So I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm also the co-lead of the working group for the Pathfinders on Peace, Just, and Inclusive Societies for the Justice for Children work, which we'll speak about later in the session today. And so I do think there's progress being made, and we're grateful to you for being here today to make that even more, to bring children more in the front of our minds as we're thinking about justice for all.
Vino, over to you.
Thank you. So, having the privilege of being selected as one of the Young Justice leaders, being the only one in Asia, actually. I feel like it is part of my responsibility to amplify the voices of children, especially those experiencing injustice, so that this global audience will get to know more about their perspective, their experiences, and maybe, just maybe, when we do this again, we will have actual children and we can listen to them directly. That is it for me.
Thank you, Vino. And as many of you will see, actually, the title of our panel today is Children and Youth at the Table. There's no table. There are also no children here. But we will be bringing in the views and perspectives of children, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But when we asked some of you who came into the room what also brought you to the table, here are some things that you told us. To learn about the subject area as it pertains to other countries. How we treat our children reflects the values of our society. Therefore, access to justice for children means justice for the most vulnerable. In order to have achieving justice for children means achieving justice for all. One person here mentioned, so we ran earlier with some other partners earlier in the week, a simulation exercise that simulated the experience of children in justice systems, and someone wrote, after attending the simulation exercise, I want to learn more of how we can ensure that children have access to justice, especially disabled, LGBTIQ children and migrants. So thanks to those of you, and there are several more here, I can leave them here, we can consult them as well. We hope that your presence here is part of, that some of your questions are answered, some of your expectations are fulfilled, and also that we leave this room as a bigger alliance who are all fighting for justice for children. So in that regard, yes, children are not here today. Why is that? Well, I think when as Tautism and partners, we've done a lot of work in recent years trying to ensure that that children who have experience of justice systems are also included in conversations, because we consider that they bring with them a certain expertise that needs to be considered alongside the expertise of other actors in the justice system. So a child who has been through the civil justice or the family courts, or a child who has been deprived of liberty, or a child who has been arrested by police in the course of a migrating across a country, these are all children that will bring expertise to the discussion of the necessary reform that Ton has mentioned, as much as lawyers or judges or policymakers or researchers. So part of what we're trying to do is also level this playing field to ensure that that expertise is acknowledged. To bring children into the physical rooms, also there are some logistical challenges. You know, there's travel, there's guardianship, there's some of these kind of what I would say more technical challenges to bringing children into the room. However, those are all surmountable if a bigger challenge is addressed, and that is, I think, the political will of including children. I think if we are able to firmly establish that achieving justice for all requires having children and young people meaningfully at the table, then I think that we will solidly be able to move forward to address and to allocate resources to that meaningful inclusion. And we hope that that today is also part of driving that work forward. So we do hope when we look towards the next World Justice Forum that we will also maybe have a more meaningful inclusion of children and young people. Failing that today, we wanted to share with you a video, which is the result of a participatory process that I've been involved in alongside Angela and other children and young people in the context of last year's World Congress on Justice with Children that my colleague Cedric coordinated. And so we wrote a declaration with all of these actors, with children and young people and judges and lawyers and policymakers, about what we think needs to happen to move forward justice for children. And the children and young people wrote a section of that declaration. And then we took that text and we made it into an animated video in order to share this information with wider audiences, to make it more accessible, because we feel that's part of the work. We need to translate these conversations, these technical language about justice, to make it accessible to all, including children. So we'd like to share that with you today. So here's the video.
We are children and young people passionate about child rights and the law. Many of us have been affected by the justice system, such as being detained or going to court.
I don't remember my childhood because I didn't live once. We still considering the children as criminal. We should just considering them children.
We work together with leaders and experts to create the Global Declaration on Justice with Children. We are asking governments and civil society to work in partnership with all children to make sure their rights are fulfilled. We want equal access to justice that does not discriminate for any reason, to share our opinions and have our views taken seriously, to make decisions about our own lives and get support from adults when we need it. We also want our mental health and well-being to be looked after, and to understand our rights so we can trust the police and courts. We want young people under 25 to have the same protection as children. We want help and information to manage crises like the pandemic, and to learn about and take part in restorative justice so we can repair relationships in our communities. Our goals are justice with children today and tomorrow, justice for children without discrimination, justice for children during crises, child-friendly access to justice for all children. Help children be children. Become a part of the puzzle. Join the movement now.
So that's the first video that you'll see. There's another video that I'm going to show that is recorded by one of the, for those of you who are in the simulation on Tuesday, you'll remember Angela Vigiel, and for those of you who were not involved, Angela is the head of pro bono for Baker McKenzie law firm, and unfortunately Angela couldn't stay till the end of the Congress, the event, the forum, but she's left us this message.
Hi, my name is Angela Vigiel, and I am very proud to be a children's lawyer. I represent children and youth under the age of 18, starting in courts in the United States and now in advocacy and policy around the world, where I am proud to stand up on behalf of future poets, bankers, business owners, artists. But at the moment that I'm standing with them, they are in their most difficult circumstances. They are involved in, accused of committing a crime. They are victimized in a crime. They are trafficked. They might be in the child welfare system. They might be experiencing homelessness. And it's through that work that I come today to be part of this discussion, very honored to be invited, about how we can inspire each other to innovate systems of justice that are created from partnerships with young people. Not just telling young people how their system works and how it's in their best interest, but learning from them how we can achieve best interests. That is not easy. I would be with you today in person, except for I was at the World Justice Forum at the beginning of the week, doing a simulation of what it's like to be a young person going through our different systems, and whether or not learning in this different way as adults, we can really start to think and see how our systems are sometimes about young people without them, and whether or not we can think about different ways to change those systems so they truly are representative of what young people know they need. That simulation, which was part of the first day of the World Justice Forum, was created with young people, saying this is what we feel like when we are talked to by adults in these different systems. And this is how frustrating it can be trying to navigate those systems when they don't work together. Well, that inspires me because I've had the pleasure of standing next to young children in courts and teenagers in courts who listen and are thoughtful and able to understand most of what goes on around them, except for their circumstances make it more difficult. And court systems speak different languages. They can understand what's being said, but not what it means. And they don't understand how systems of justice seem to be serving needs of the adults in the system, maybe even those working in the system, and not always theirs. I am inspired by the young people that are speaking today and some of my colleagues in the child advocacy space that have recognized that we have to start thinking differently about how we train adults if those adults are actually going to be part of systems that don't keep kids what they call invisible. We have to reconsider things like the use of deprivation of liberty and detention as just sort of an automatic reaction in so many places. In so many places around the world, including the United States where I practice, while international standards say that it should be a last resort and for the least possible amount of time, because jails are paid for, because doors are open and ready to be filled, because maybe it's our reaction, because it's our past habit, because maybe we don't think about the unintended consequences of what happens when you deprive a person of their liberty. We have way too many children that end up there, way too many teens that stay there because they can't negotiate and navigate with the systems that put them there in order to figure out a place where they could be released. I work primarily with children who are accused of very serious crimes in the United States, and the treatment of them is not what you think about when you think about what young people should be experiencing from any system, certainly not a court system. I am proud and inspired to work with young people to do things like design the simulation we did for the World Justice Forum this week, and to think about how we can do more to be able to make sure that systems are responsive and changing as society changes and not just staying the way that they've always been.
Brilliant. So thanks to those videos, we've heard some of the perspectives of children and young people represented in their own words, through their own artistic-based methods, and also on behalf of someone who has experience working alongside children as a lawyer. I'd like to turn it to a panel now for the next round of questions. And so we heard in the videos a range of issues that are being brought forward in terms of priorities of addressing access to justice for children. So I'd like to ask our panelists, what would you like to emphasize or highlight in terms of the key issues that really need to be addressed when we are thinking about improving access to justice for children as part of improving access to justice for all? Vina.
Okay, so this is something that I mentioned as well earlier during my panel with my new friend, Mary Robinson. So I mentioned that injustices that happen in real life are replicated and even magnified further online, and that is also true for children. So take, for example, the issue of digital inclusion and safety. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, take, for example, back home in the Philippines, we shifted to fully online classes. So a lot of Filipino children were not able to go to school, just stopped going to school because they don't have access to stable and affordable internet connection. So, and then when it comes to digital safety, so one of my younger cousin, a 7-year-old girl, she plays Roblox on her own. And the parents are very clueless when it comes to those kinds of technology. But I check her activity and I notice there are creeps who are trying to interact with her there. And we haven't talked enough about the dangers of the dangers available online, especially for children, especially if they are left unsupervised. So I think there needs to be a conversation as well. We highlight a lot of injustices happening to children in real life, but also I think there needs to be a further premium on looking at justice-related issues happening with children online, especially on digital inclusion and safety.
Thank you, Vina. Anyone else would like to come in, either reacting to what Vina said or adding additional issues that we have to look at?
Well, I mean, thank you for that point. I mean, I think this is absolutely important point, and it also shows, I think, the complexity that we are facing when we work together on access to justice for children. And what I mean is that I think this particular example shows that children, that the digital environment in which children are and live and grow up is coming with both opportunities and risks, and it should imply that we really invest in our understanding of that digital environment. And I think it's an example that shows that there is still quite a big disconnect between adults and children in that regard. And that is also, you can also see that in a wide variety of other areas. And the point that I take from that is that if we really want to make a connection between access to justice and children, we also have to make a connection between adults and children. So we have to understand the specific challenges that children face, in addition to the general challenges that everyone faces when it comes to access to justice. We have to understand the different contexts in which children need access to justice. Children with disabilities, children in the mental health sector, children in immigration situation, children in conflict or post-conflict, children in the justice system, children in family situations like Angela. And we need to make that connection. And above all, I think, we need to ask the question, what do children expect from access to justice? When it comes to the remedies and the outcomes of it, do we really know? I don't think we know already what children expect. So maybe to end this point, we have to redesign and start by answering these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ton. You did mention conflict. Oh, Angela, did you want to go?
If Tom has something else to say.
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say that it's very true what you said until now. I want to add that if internet can be a dangerous space, indeed, we don't have to forget that it's very useful. So parents should not go on the other side of not allowing children to go onto the internet at all. They just have to make sure that the children are safe, because let's not forget, children are like sponges. If you teach them with love, proper information, and they have good role models, they will grow just fine. Because they are full of curiosity and the wish to be loved and listened. So internet, it's a resource for them to learn information. Parents just have to make sure that they get the right one.
May I jump in with just in response to that again? A further response in relation to digitalization. I think it illustrates something really important for us about the implementation gap and how hard it is to close that gap between what we think is right and what children's rights are, and how that exists and happens for children on a day-to-day basis. So if we're thinking about children's evolving capacities, then for a 7-year-old, you're obviously really wanting to step in there to be checking to make sure that that child is safeguarded. For a 17, 18-year-old, maybe you'd have a different approach to that. And the challenge of that, that's a distinctive aspect of children. So when we're thinking about children and justice, then it really creates even more complexity and difficulties in terms of then what do adults need to know about how children's capacities evolve, and how do we ensure we're sufficiently empowering them, but at the same time also stepping in to safeguard. That's really tough to know, and actually can be very, it's like on a moment-to-moment basis as parents, as families, as as uncles and others. So for me, that example is really important, but it also reinforces to us the challenge of closing that implementation gap and the role that the people directly around children in their lives play, and the role the responsibility we have to help support those people in their roles to support justice for children.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, being a government representative, I think some of the things we really need to bring on the table is, one, to bring the children themselves. Just listening to Angela and then thinking about my country, we've developed 2 national child justice strategy. In as much as we need to have adults on the table, but then when you listen to the voice of the children, I think it actually opens your eyes. And I don't think in the development of our national strategy, there have been cases in which we've really brought young people to sit on the table to understand their justice needs or their voices. So it's really one of the things as a government representative, whenever we're working on these strategies, we need to be clear as much as we do not want to leave everything in the hands of the children. And because we are adults and maybe we've gone through those processes, we are much more experienced, sort of. we need to get them on the table. And then there are actually other alternatives. We need to invest in working on diversion policies, coming with alternative to detention, encourage community services, and just making sure that children are children, creates the right environment and the support system. Because myself being a parent, I wouldn't want my child to go through a system that doesn't favor them, a system that will discriminate, a system that does not capture their voices. So as policymakers, I think we should really be able to bring all institutions together, publicize the needs of children, make sure that the institutions that work on children's issues are really part of that conversation, and make sure that they get the interest of the children on board when they develop in programs within government. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe just also maybe can I come back to Shahid as well, because some of the things that all of the panelists have mentioned around also the need to develop context-specific answers to these questions. In your country, and you mentioned it in the introduction, it's also a country in a post-conflict setting, and that some of the specific justice needs for children would be related to that. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that now, or any of the other panelists as well would like to say about that? Maybe Shahid first.
Yeah, so Sierra Leone is, I'm happy that I'm part of really this discussion. And then on a lighter note, when we started, and as a government representative, I thought I should have taken the offer to exchange seats so that I wouldn't go first. Then I'll just listen to what, because from my point of view, really, it's about listening to what the conversation is. Usually, government programs and policies for where I'm from, it's really politics actually influences. So when it's comes to political rallies and all that, so politicians are much more interested when it comes to numbers, and they may tend to ignore the key messages that may be needed by children. So for me, I think in terms of developing programs or policies, really, again, we need to be very specific, and then we need to also make sure that there's enough publicity on the needs of children, on the needs of on the need to include their own perspective in our national development programs. Again, for government entities, I think accountability is quite important, because usually we do not just make promises when we're out as opposition, and then when you come in, there is nothing to really take home. And I'm happy to report that, and I did say this when we had the senior management meeting, I mean the Justice Action Coalition, that in Sierra Leone we developed a national development plan, and then we are just at the point of a midterm review. So midterm review actually speaks to those commitments that you had made. So if you had made a commitment that by the end of this year, you're going to make sure that children, there are programs or laws that provide safety guard for children, you have to account for that. So for us, I think governments should really integrate those child-friendly programs into the National Development Plan. Maybe just finally on this point, there is also a need to train child justice actors, because you may come across situations where children come in contact with the law, and then their first points of call may be the police, or they go to courts. And it's such a scary environment for them. If you come across a police that is really unfriendly, that has not been trained on how to be friendly to children, I think you'd rather just scare them. So we should be very sensitive on their needs, and making sure that we do not integrate them or get them mixed up with hardcore criminals, because we've had places where remand homes are not provided for children. Even where they are, there is nothing there. It's really, those places are really dilapidated. So those needs for us would have to be taken care of, and I think government needs to do more. And the reason, finally, I'm really grateful that I'm part of this conversation is the fact that when I sit in these meetings, I think just from listening to the panelists, it's actually created some form of awareness in me that most of these issues we tend to discuss around ticking the boxes, but we do not zero in on the actual implementation when it comes to that. So this is something that I will take in, and I'm privileged to work with the Attorney General and the Chief Justice. And then these are people that basically handle such issues and other ministries. So I think I'll just pause there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure that the person who wrote that they were hoping to learn from other countries, hopefully there's also some learning here. We will talk about, next action, how to drive this forward in the next segment. But before we go to that, were there any other key issues that any of the panelists wanted to raise, saying that this is actually key issue for the child justice agenda? First Angela, then Vina.
Okay, sorry. Well, yes. Regarding the problem of war that I heard, I do believe that connected to it, it's the problem of child trafficking, because sadly, in the period of the pandemic and now with the war of Ukraine as well, human trafficking, in special child trafficking, was much more higher than before. And let's think about it. Sadly, if a child is trafficked, and especially if it's a victim of a war, more than sure they will be considered a victim of the war and will be not searched. No one will search for the child to see if they were kidnapped or if they were victim in the war. So we have to think about this. We have to find solutions in this time of catastrophic periods. I can't call them a different thing because we are in 2022, sorry, and we still have war. That's bad. That's sad. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that I wanted to say. And maybe another point, it's about restorative justice that we discussed about in the video as well. Once again, in the period of the pandemic, during the closing of everything, children that were in trial and were having restorative justice didn't go through the same process. The human connection was lost. The law was not helping them as before. For example, I was talking with a specialist called Cecilia Popa about this when I did a podcast with her. And she told me a story that impacted me very much on this topic. More exactly, she told me about the story of two children who accidentally killed their own friend. And I do believe that if their case would have been online during the pandemic, they would have not learned from their mistake as the same way they learned when it was in person. Because she told me that when they had a meeting with the parents chose the spot. Where did they choose? To meet next to the grave of the friend. The children were literally hit with their own problem. They saw that their actions had a very devastating repercussion. They didn't only destroy their own lives, they destroyed the life of another person. I do believe that that could be like a wake-up call for them, realizing that they can turn around and learn from their mistakes. If it was online, I do believe that it wouldn't have the same impact.
And that kind of brings us back to some of the things we were discussing before around the digital environment and what that means for transforming and for healing, for processing and for living in the world we live in. Vino, is there anything you wanted to add on anything before we move on to the next part?
Yes, just very quickly. So it was really nice to hear that from the government side, there is interest and efforts when it comes to putting in pro-children policies, but then at the same time, I think we should also put in some effort in making the concept of children's rights, child justice, and these good policies for children more known in the grassroots level. So back in college, I worked for a campus-based children's rights organization, and when we go to the communities, when we discuss human rights, they see it as something that is partisan, political. But when we talk about children's rights, though, they lean in and they want to listen. Because I think when we go to communities, when we talk to moms, especially Asian moms, we want what's best for their children. So I feel like there is an opportunity there to create allies on the ground. Just letting them know what are children's rights and what they can do about it in their own personal capacity. I think that would create a make deal when it comes to upholding child justice and children's rights, not just at the national level, but also at the grassroots level.
Thank you, Vino, for raising that. And on that point, I would like to bring in the views of two astounding allies to the child justice movement worldwide. So the first video that we'll see has been shared with us by Benoit van Kiersblik, who is the Director of Defense for Children International Belgium. And he's also a member of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. And after that, we will hear a video message from Najat Malamjid, who is the United Nations, who is a special representative to the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. So we'll listen to their videos, and then we'll have a round of reactions from the panel, and then we'd love to hear from you. So if any of the things that our panelists have shared or that you've heard in the videos, we'd love to also open this up for discussion. But first, over to Benoit.
Dear friends of the child justice, I would have loved to be with you to discuss this very important topic. We will all agree that the respect of children's rights depends on their justiciability. Without real, concrete, accessible, and above all, child-friendly mechanisms, the human rights of children will remain theoretical. We must recognize that today, in most countries, a child who considers that his or her rights have not been respected and who wishes to complain about this will encounter major difficulties and obstacles in making himself or herself heard. Our justice systems as a whole are not at all adapted to the needs of children and to the compelling need to give them a voice and to consider them as actors of their own rights. First and foremost, access to justice and means of complaint must be guaranteed at local and national level. International mechanisms should only be used when national mechanisms are unable to provide a satisfactory response within a reasonable time frame for the child. Mechanisms to be strengthened at national level include children's ombudsman. These should be established in each country, be truly independent, and have a very broad mandate to monitor the implementation of children's rights generally and to deal with complaints in a child-friendly manner. Social Legal Defense Center. Such centers, usually run by NGOs, have the mission to provide children with legal information in clear language and to offer legal and social support for the practical realization of children's rights. They are there precisely to support children in their efforts to ensure that they can be heard without too much pressure from the adults around them and to be able to express their choices in full autonomy. Appropriate and accessible participation and complaint mechanisms in the various places where children are most likely to be found: schools, sport, leisure clubs, institutions for the protection and care of children in conflict with the law, to name but a few. A system of free legal aid with specialized, trained, and accessible lawyers who can intervene whenever a child is involved in a procedure or wishes to file a complaint to assert his or her rights.
So, some expert advice from Benoit. And now, if anyone needs to be energized, the call to action from Najat.
Dear children and young justice leaders, very warm greetings to you all. I deeply regret that I cannot be with you in person, but I am very pleased to join you through this message. As we start a new phase of campaigning for justice with children, I have several messages for you. I am truly inspired by your action, commitment, and strength to make a world more equal, just, and peaceful place to live for all. In many parts of the world, you and your peers are at the forefront of social movements for change. This includes climate action, anti-racism, social justice, gender equality, protection of your peers and their rights, peace-building processes, among others. Your initiative and action inspire innovative and creative solutions. They guide and contribute to future laws and policies and contribute to create more equal and inclusive justice systems for children and youth as a foundation for equal access to justice for all. Through every single engagement dialogue with you, I feel inspired by the agency, capacity, and strength that you are demonstrating. But through these dialogues, I am also learning about everyday challenges that you and your peers are still facing all over the world. This includes, among others, lack of access to justice in all its forms, including criminal and civil justice, as well as economic, social, and cultural justice. Yet, too often, you are still forgotten in the design and implementation of justice systems that are meant to uphold and protect your rights. Dear children and young justice leaders, all forms of justice can be more effective if they are informed by your views and experience and built on your effective participation. To this end, we need to consider you as partners to improve access to justice in all its forms for all, leaving no one behind. You are part of the solution, and you need to be fully involved in the designs of laws and policies, in budget decision, and in daily action to make justice systems child and gender sensitive and accessible to all children. To ensure your active engagement and participation, empowering safe pathway for all of you, not just privileged few, need to be provided. You have the right to receive information, to express yourselves, to defend environmental and human rights, to participate in decision-making processes, and to undertake peer-to-peer initiative. And we need to ensure that these rights are duly guaranteed and your initiative are duly supported by decision makers and scaled up by governments. Dear children and young justice leaders, now is a time to forge this intergenerational partnership where you could be a voice not only for yourself, but also for thousands of peers who are invisible and left voiceless, including those with experience of coming into contact with the criminal justice systems. And together with Justice for Action Coalition partners, I look forward to engaging more and more with you for an effective justice in all its forms, with and for you. Thank you.
So I've heard this saying multiple times today. I heard it actually in the session earlier with Chanel and Vino and Mary Robinson. Now is the time. So what better moment than now for us to announce also the launch of the Justice for Children Agenda for Action on how we plan to, and we, based on all of these consultations, based on the large movement of allies that you've seen here, participation of children and young people, how we hope to be moving forward with this agenda for action on including children and young people in achieving justice for all as part of the 2030 agenda. We have framed this agenda for action according to 4 areas. Some of you may have received the card, and you can hopefully use that QR code later on to have a look at in detail. But essentially, these 4 areas in which we're calling for action are around partnership. And so we consider this as intergenerational partnership, which we're seeing the emergence of today. innovation, effective innovation, but innovation which is mindful of the harms of digitalization, but also harnessing the goods, because we need both. Effective use of data to inform policymaking, and also smarter financing. So I'd like to ask our panelists, where do we go from here? How do we drive this action forward together? What do you think are some of the critical mobilizing actions that we need to be taking? Jennifer.
No's just handed me the mic. Thank you. Well, what I did want to say is Benoit and Najat, who we've just heard from in the video, are also part of the core working group that has developed the agenda for action that's outlined on the paper, on the postcard that you've seen. And we would really encourage you to be joining us in this work as we look to the year ahead and the next sort of 7 years as the 2030 agenda is coming to close at 2030. So where do we want to get to in that time? Well, I think as we heard this morning in the intergenerational dialogue with Vino's new friend Mary and alongside Shanil, the intergenerational partnerships really need to include not just a token one young person at the table, but really equal engagement with children and young people at the table who are central to the conversation. And I think what was really helpful to hear from Mary Robinson this morning, if I may say, was just her reflection on how that changes the conversation and it changes what we hear. And I think what we're really seeking together to do with our ambition for intergenerational partnership as the way forward is to find these new ways for new solutions, because I think we're recognizing at the moment that we are hitting a time when the converging crises are very significant. If they haven't been for many, they are certainly significant for many now. And if we don't come up with new solutions, we won't come through this in a way that achieves justice for all. So our interest is in engaging with children and young people very closely to see them no longer as, to actually see them and bring them out of the invisibility that often happens, accidentally, perhaps with good intentions, but to try and make them more visible in all of our worlds in order to understand what's needed to respond best with them and for justice.
Thank you, Jennifer. Angela?
Thank you. In my opinion, I think it's time to act indeed, because yes, justice is key, but we are the holders of that key. We need to power it, and we need to start building from the base the justice system. Because by helping the children in this system, we are helping the future adults. We do that by actually including the children into the answer. Listening to their opinion and solutions, we can develop the future that we are hoping for. We need to let the voice of the youth not be just a whisper in the wind, because that's how it is. We are listening, but not always. They are talking, but they are not heard. So let them be loud, let them be innovative, powerful, and let them lend us even their craziness, because let's be serious. Sometimes a bit of craziness is the push that we need to overcome obstacles.
Indeed, I think it's always helpful that we challenge ourselves to just go beyond maybe what we've ever done before. And that's scary, though. What else? What other ideas, brilliant ideas, do we have on our panel?
Not sure brilliant ideas, but what I have heard so much, there's so much to reflect on, but I would like to connect to what you said, Angela, the human connection. And I think if that helps us to have the right narrative here, I think. And it may sound a bit academic, but it's essentially very practical, is that we really, together, both adults and children, bearing in mind the coming generations, that we continue to work on this narrative that is about the human connection. It's about recognizing humans as human beings in the first place, or with regard to children as children in the first place. So not as asylum seekers, not as mental health persons with mental health issues, not as street children, no, as children in the first place. That helps us to have the common and and right perspective on access to justice. And that also comes with your point, is really that we need to acknowledge children as rights holders. And it may sound so obvious, but it's one of the biggest problems. We need access to justice to hold state and non-state actors to account. Without that, children's rights are not so meaningful. But it's also the other way around. We need to recognize children as rights holders, because otherwise we don't feel the need to work on access to justice, to hold those who are responsible to account. And that is going beyond the state as an actor. It's also non-state actors, of course. So that connection, and that human connection in particular, is, I think, an extremely powerful message. And I think the whole initiative that is presented here with the 4 specific pillars is really, really helpful. So thank you for having me in the conversation again.
Thank you, Tom.
So maybe just to take from you, Christine, the time is now, but I think we should also continue the conversation. In the last video, there was talk about economic injustice. I think when you discuss justice needs of children, we also have to be mindful of the context. Economic injustice may be affecting children across the world at different dimensions and different contexts. I think that has to be noted. There are families that really struggle, even when they're adults, to make ends meet. So when you want to preach justice to them, it's really difficult for them to comprehend really what that is. So in as much as we are on the global stage, we have to also be very specific in terms of context. And I think it's the same kind of idea that the entire access to justice that is incorporated when we speak about the G7 plus conflict affected countries. Their own justice needs may be different from other countries. So I think that has to be taken into account in terms of moving forward. And there are other countries that really do have legal aid services provided to children that come in contact with the law. I think there has to be enough support in terms of capacity building. And then again, I'll reiterate the point that those children that come in contact with the law, their first points of call, those in the public service, the police, the judges, the lawyers, they really have to be careful how they deal with them, because that first interface may create forever kind of impact on a child growing up. Just when you've mistakenly done something, maybe committed an offense, and then you basically out there with a very scary environment. And we've had cases in which we've reviewed our Sexual Offences Act, and then you get a child standing in front of maybe a judge or so. They're asking for things to play with, not even being aware of the gravity of what they've done. You know what I mean? So how do you move from there? How do you support those kind of children? I think it has to be looked into. And then sorry, I think I tried to note a few things here. Okay, so yeah, I've talked about legal aid support and then support to families. We cannot really have these conversations about children without getting adults. I think it's the same debate when it comes to women issues. We've had issues, discussions in which, all the women's rights and all that, and people are involved in domestic violence and all. Usually, who are the perpetrators? It's a male. So you want to have those conversations. Get as much male or get as much adults in the room as you get children, so that the information is disseminated and everyone goes home thinking that we can really move forward. So let us continue the conversation. Let us act. Let us be very context specific, and in the end, let us try to provide for all, because like the coronavirus, if it affects one, it affects all. Thank you.
Thank you. Lena.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think this intergenerational work is really nice, but then at the same time, we also need to ensure that this intergenerational work is also multi-sector, and it's also involving people from all walks of life. Because something that I realized is that there is that misconception about justice that it is just for the elite, for the rich, for the privileged. And I feel like there is that danger wherein when we do intergenerational work, we engage people across generations that are easy to reach. So I think we need to put premium in extending a little bit more effort to reach out to those people that we don't normally reach, include their voices, include their perspectives, and make sure that we put ordinary people at the center, especially those that are normally unheard. Because I think we just need to get this right this time. Let's make sure that we are as people-centered, we are as inclusive as we can be in all of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Vina. So, does anyone in the audience have anything that they'd like to react to or share, or any questions? We do have a roaming microphone, so maybe what we'll do is, so I see 4 hands, maybe we'll take it in 2 sets of questions. So the first, just to make it easier also for our microphone handling person, I will go start where you're closest to.
Hello, my name is Lissa Green. I'm a student from the University of Houston in Texas. Just a quick reaction to what was being said. So I actually came here because I'm a student and I'm 18, and even though I'm considered an adult in the US, I think it's important that students and young people are aware of the rights that they have in our justice system. And hearing this conversation kind of had me thinking about, in the US, we suffer a lot from not listening to our children, like Angela was saying before. We have a lot of laws and policies, especially in Texas, that are made to be sweeping for everybody. Like, for instance, our abortion law, there's a current trigger law that's waiting for our Supreme Court to come out with a decision. And if that does come out in Texas at 17 years old, you are considered an adult. So if a 17-year-old were to try to get an abortion, they could be punished for up to 99 years and have the full fine. So there's sweeping laws that are made like that, but we suffer from that. And not only do we suffer from that, but our children suffer from things such as gun violence, because laws are made where children are not at the table to actually have a conversation about the spaces that they're in. It's very weird that I spent my entire school life doing gun drills, whereas other countries cannot say that at all. So I think that it was definitely beneficial for me to be here to listen to that. I actually run a advocacy group for young children to speak up for themselves and be able to have conversations with adults in manners to be able to not only speak up about things that are important to them, but about things that they feel like they don't have any naysay in, such as policy and being able to talk about laws. So I just want to thank you all for your input. It was really informative and I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much to you. So we'll then go over to Joe, and then we can, if is it a question? Feel free. No? Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, no. No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First of all, Angela, you're such an inspiration, honestly. And I want to tell you that I've been there and I feel you. And my parents were divorced too. And there was violence at home. And I used to cover myself in the sheets while sleeping at night. Now I remembered everything while you were talking. And honestly, the main question that we need to answer is, I think Mr. Tony asked it, that what would children expect from us? Laws are very important, and everything written on paper is very important, and programs that we develop are really important. But if we do not work on delivering our personal experiences as children or youth to decision makers and juvenile judges, etc., create this human connection and make them feel, or put them in our shoes, like the experiment that we did 2 days ago, nothing will work. So I salute you and I encourage you. I'm trying to do my best in my country, and I'm sure you're going to keep doing what you're doing for youth. And I hope one day we will make everyone feel where we've been, to be able to reach to a certain point where justice for children is going to be accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Angela, did you want to respond to that? Or?
Thank you. And yes, I wanted to say that I hope that one day we will see the day when everyone will be judged fair, and children will have their saying in things that's happening, especially if it's including if they are things about their family. Because yes, maybe I was very young, but all those memories are stuck with me for life, and I will never be able to forget them. I might have my happy place to say so now, but at that moment it was terrifying.
Thank you, Angela. So I saw another hand, so yourself, and then I did see a hand back there, so perhaps you, and then...
Thank you, and thanks to the panelists. My name is Ditlhare Rabel. I'm from South Africa. I work for an organization called Foundation for Human Rights, and I've had the privilege of working in many countries across the continent, including Sierra Leone, Liberia, and South Sudan, mainly focusing on women and children's rights, particularly those affected by conflicts. But also coming from South Africa, a country that has one of the highest rates of gender-based violence in the world. So that brings to the importance of context. We have children affected by conflicts, then there's this other social issues like domestic violence, and with conflicts, then it leads to refugees and increases the human trafficking and all those issues South Africa has had to deal with because we attract most of the migrants, economic migrants, refugees from across the continent, including as far as Ethiopia and the neighboring countries. And a couple of reflections are that we make a mistake of always putting women and children's issues together. And I'm saying this through my personal work experience over the years. And what that does is that children's issues are always underlined, undermined, because it's women and children, there's women and children in conflict, women and children. So we need to be intentional about women's issues and, children's issues, including access to justice, then we'll be able to give them the attention that they need. The importance of raising awareness, including in communities and in schools, having those child-friendly documents. The continent has the Charter on Children's Rights. How do we popularize this in our respective regions in IGAD, ECOWAS, and in Southern Africa? One of the successes in South Africa is that there's an opportunity for children to engage Parliament. In November, there's a week where children go to Parliament. It's called Children's Parliament. And they raise the issues that they have. Progress might be slow, but that's a space where I think some of the lessons for other countries to say, if there's an opportunity for children to speak directly to their governments, that really helps. Yeah, and just one example to say, we find it difficult from as civil society to change mindset and stereotypes around children's rights. In South Africa and most countries in Africa, corporal punishment is like the way we were brought up. And recently in South Africa, Parliament passed the law to ban corporal punishment in schools. It was debated for a long time, but it was successful. Right now, they can't move on banning corporal punishment in the home. So those are some of the challenges that we have to deal with that are really an infringement to children's rights. But there's opportunities out there, and thank you.
Thank you for sharing the experience from South Africa. I think we'll go to, I saw the hand over here first, and then we can come back. And then, so I think it was this lady on the aisle, yes. And of course, after this, if anyone wants to react, what was heard before this final.
Okay, first of all, thank you for sharing your experiences. And I think we sometimes do not recognize that children and young people normally are in a place of vulnerability that is raised from the institutional design, particularly. Like they don't have legal capacity, and often they are represented by the people that are infringing their rights. I see that the main elements that you showed of the institutional reform, they are all up-down. Let's say they are all oriented for reforming only the institution. And I think all that we have been talking during these days is that it is very important to reform bottom-up too. And there are a lot of benefits on reforming bottom-up too. It is important of empowering the children and granting the better legal advice, or I don't know, I'm thinking right now, but we need to design different strategies to really empower them and to provide them with a voice and with the capacity for speak for themselves and for their rights. And this have to be taken in account into institutional design too. And this connects with the thing that the lady just was saying. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous when I'm in the microphone. But this connects too, because when we do institutional reforms, we are thinking generally. And the benefits of thinking about bottom-up reforms is that we can design strategies for the particular context of the different people. Then I think this is very important. And yes, the comment is that in the card, at least, I'm just seeing strategies oriented to, how do you say? Yeah, just institutional. It has to be like centered in the community and in the children particularly, not only institutional reform. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. And I really invite you, please, to read the document, because it's just a summary. Actually, in the interest of time, what I would propose, if the panel is okay, is actually that we take the remaining comments. I will ask you to be brief, so that we could then hand back to the panelists for any responses and concluding remarks before we wrap up. So, so the other hands, can you just raise your hand? So I saw this young man, this young lady, and this young man. So 3 more comments, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to really agree with most of the things that you shared. And also following her intervention, it's to give an example of the bottom, not bottom up, but sometimes she mentioned about the implementation challenge. Sometimes we focus on the legislation and everything that is happening, but when it comes to the application of it, then it becomes a problem. So, and also it will be a call for those who work in development or humanitarian sector, that we are trying to accompany our government to really be able to apply those legislations. So, for example, in our program, I work for an organization called Help a Child. We do work with the community, and yes, we work through a program called Early Child Development, which the government mostly don't think that is that important. And also we work with youth and the parents. We have set like a parent community at each colline, and also child protection committee when there is parents, youth, and also children themselves who represent others. So those different structures, they will meet to try to find a solution to different problems. And also parents are taught on parenting skills, because we assume that when someone gets a child, they know what to do. They know how the parenting goes, but most of the time it's also lack of knowledge. They don't know how to deal with different issues, and the children becomes victim of those things that happen in the community. So these are some of the things that we are doing to try to support the government to be really able to create that environment for children to grow in through those schools and through those community structures, so that even in their homes, so that the parents, they know not only the parenting, it includes like nutrition, hygienic, like wash, like how do you really create that environment in their home, because that's where they spend most of the time. For instance, those who have small children, they will need, for instance, to go to work in the field, but they don't have anywhere to place them, like in the rural area. So sometimes they will be just playing, by themselves. There is no real facilities for those kind of small children to be able to grow, like physically and emotionally and everything else.
Thank you for highlighting that, the intersectionality of all of those problems. What was the country that you said Help a Child? What country was it? Burundi. Oh, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your work. To this gentleman over here, and then finally to our final.
Hi, my name is Mcdermott. I work at DCAP, which is the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. One of the things that we do is we work with institutions, and so we sort of inherently have a top-down approach. And so what I'd be curious to learn about is how do we design these sort of policies and strategies? So when we engage with the police and try and build this sort of child-responsive response, how can we design flexible strategies that allow each police officer, whomever it is, to engage in a responsive way? I mean, a point that came up earlier was that even just within children, there's a wide variety of different sort of needs and responses required. And so then when we design these sort of child responsive policies, how can we have them flexible so that it's responsive enough for a 7-year-old as it is for a 17-year-old. And so if there's any practices, maybe we'll run out of time, but we can talk afterwards about that as well. So.
Fantastic question. Thank you so much. And to this gentleman over here.
Thank you. My name is Michael Erheim. I'm from Nigeria. I'm not actually a legal practitioner, but I'm an individual who I'm keen and interested in supporting groups who take much interest in fighting for the voiceless, especially the children. And from my country, it's nearly, it's very expensive to get justice, and some of these groups find it very difficult to continue with the fight to seek justice for children who are suffering from domestic abuse and all that. There are so many of these groups like Behind Bars who find so much interest in fighting for children who are abused by their parents and their guardians and all that. One of the speakers has said, Mr. Shahid, that they need to get men and on the table with the children when talking about child abuse. I quite agree with him, but on the other side, I believe child abuse is really not gender-based. I mean, there have been situations and cases where women and men support and abet abuses on children, and I have seen so many experiences and cases like this, and I weep really bad because some of these, a lot of these children, not some of them, none of them deserves it, and a lot of them don't get justice. I'm very much concerned to know what can this group or individuals do when they are not able to get the necessary support to seek justice for these children? What can they do to kick the government and get them coming for these children?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. And please, for any of you who have anything to say, you haven't had a chance, please don't hesitate to come up to us afterwards to continue the conversation. So I'll now pass over to my panelists, maybe starting with Vino, so that you have some time, Shahid, to react to anything. You don't necessarily need to respond to it all, and then any final concluding remarks that you'd like to share.
Okay, so the question from Sarah earlier, it just reminded me of my time as an investigative journalist covering the war on drugs in the Philippines, wherein I interviewed children who surrendered because they were really scared that if they get caught by the police, they'll be killed. And there are a lot of children out there who was killed in the line of Duterte's war on drugs, which is also known as a war against the poor. It's not really a war on drugs. It is war against the poor. So with that being said, and just remembering the conversations we had with them, how scared they were, how helpless they feel like, because some of them, their parents were killed already, they're orphans of the drug war already, and they are the next target. So I think in order for us to get that bottom-up approach and then just to improve how we do it, how we approach things, the first step I feel like would be to approach these people who experienced injustice, these children, and then listen to their lived experiences and learn from those. I think that is definitely the first step. When it comes to introducing reforms or improving situations, we'll definitely not get it right for all situations at the first time. But at the very least, we make this commitment that it is going to be a continuous improvement, a continuous learning, just by listening to more and more people, more children who experience injustice during their childhood.
Thank you, Pino. Jennifer?
There's just so much to say. I'm going to be very brief, though, because I am really struck by what you've just shared and what we heard at the end as well, in terms of just the myriad of different ways in which children live in the world, that in ways that we don't want them to have to live, aren't there? So I'm just struck by that. I think I'd like to speak to two things briefly. One is in relation to the comment about how do police engage. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to someone afterwards who's done some work on child-friendly policing. But more importantly, as a set of principles, all throughout today, we've been talking about different layers and levels of intervention, aren't we? We're really reinforcing grassroots, is I think one of the key messages we've been hearing. But much of the work that I'm involved with the Pathfinders is at institutional level and at government level. And so we're looking at what's the enabling context that government and laws can create, and then how do we close that gap between the two? So different comments were sort of speaking at different levels, and I think the comment about policing is relevant to all professionals who are working with children, and that is, there is a whole strategy we need to be thinking around who are we recruiting to the task in the first place, what training are we offering them at the beginning, and what coaching are we offering throughout in order for a competence-based approach to achieving the kind of responses we're looking for children. So in any of the child-friendly initiatives that we're asking for, that we're seeking, I think together we recognize the need for that. There are a number of elements that the evidence would indicate to us are really important for us to be considering, and that when we're starting with a whole workforce, that of course there's things we need to do with them, but we also need to be thinking about the throughput, if you will, of the workforce. Who are we recruiting next? Who are we helping to leave? And how do we think about these kinds of issues in relation to achieving child-friendly justice? And the second piece I'd like to bring in is this idea about systematic intergenerational engagement. So I love the example from South Africa, thank you, about children's parliament, so children coming to speak to parliament. But what we'd like to propose is thinking about how do we not just do this as a consultation, how do we not just do this as here are some children, young people speaking, but how do we create governments and parliaments, institutions and others to be accountable on an ongoing basis to the communities and the citizens to whom they serve, or to whom they should be accountable and whom they serve. And until we get a sort of a systematic intergenerational engagement that is part of how policies are made, I don't think we'll get where we need to get to. But that's a vision I think that's really achievable if we begin to think about how we go from this kind of intergenerational dialogue to something that's embedded and systematic in the way in which governments take their work forward.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and maybe add to your question that it's absolutely critical also as part of your bottom-up strategies that you understand the language in the different professional environments that you target. So it's either police or it's institution staff or it is immigration personnel or whatever. They talk language, their own language. They have their own professional environment, their own professional skills and their own narrative. And there you have to include the key messages that come out of the Access to Justice for Children agenda. And there you have to make the connection. If you don't make that connection, you lose them immediately and you're not effective. There are many examples of how that could work. Luckily, we are getting more and more knowledge about it and also practical experience. Everyone here, I think, and also in the room. So it's language, words matter, narrative matters. And we have to change that. And then it can be a credible and effective strategy. I very much like your reflection on women and children. I just want to flag that one because I think it's important. Children are not an appendix to women or anyone else. Children have rights in their own name. But you often see that there is a ministry of women and children, that there is a strategy for women and children, which is, if I may, rather old-fashioned. And it's actually both disregarding women and children. So it's still framing that as the two vulnerable groups in society. And I think we have moved beyond that. So I just want to flag that. Thanks for all the empowering comments, and empowering is what we should do, I think.
Thank you. Yes, regarding the topic that you said, that it includes women and children on the same boat, to say so. Indeed, when you are putting them together, you are literally taking half of the importance of each one. So in place of focusing fully on one, you are just giving half your work in for them. So yeah, that needs to slowly be changed. And regarding your question on how the police can act, first of all, they have to listen, really listen. They don't need to force the kids to do something. They don't need to actually really assure them. They need to be there for the children and listen to them. Allow them to slowly open up, because if the child did or something was done to them, they will be very scared to open up in the beginning. So they have to be patient and listen. And how the poor person can do something when they feel like the justice it's not served to them. In my opinion, I think that in those moments the society is having a role as well. I think that if the justice it's not done for a child, those around the child first needs to support it and make them and assure them that they will continue to be loved, to be supported, and they will try to find a solution one way or another. Maybe at the moment we don't have the best options, but I'm pretty sure that with all our work together, slowly we will do better and better, and we will not have a problem like this. So support, it's the best option, sadly, at the moment, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much. So for me, I think the child justice actors, those that develop policies and tend to implement them should be on the ground as well. Let us have the actual stories. Let us meet the children that are affected. Let us speak to the parents, and then it basically changes you. When you come across street children, in some places, and then you start to think about developing national strategy for the street children, it's an injustice issue. It's an economic injustice. Again, it comes to context. Let us be closer to the people that we're representing. You mentioned how do we get the police to act. I think this is where training comes in. Again, like the discussion we're having at the onset, you need to get them on the table. When you're developing these programs, they have to be part of it. When we developed a diversion policy, an alternative to detention, we had to invite the chief of police. So his representative was there. So basically, if there's a diversion policy, you get trained. And we know in Africa, usually the police will get moved, but then there has to be a way of passing on knowledge to others. So if you were to come in contact with a child and you've gone through that training, you basically know what to do. And you train training of trainers. I'll give you an example. For us, we've trained police prosecutors. We have within the police force, we have the family support units and social workers, community stakeholders, civil societies. People dealing with children's issues have to be trained that when you deal with a child, it has to be child friendly. Again, maybe on the very last point, so in my country, we've just recently developed a national street child policy, and we're looking at ways of identifying families that have left these children on the streets, and then finding ways of unifying them. Again, the discussion should not end in just these rooms, because at those points we may be the privileged few. But then we need to zero in, go down to the people that are affected. It changes you when you come in contact with people with real life stories. That's why I really love the videos. I think we should be able to raise more awareness. Let us have the actual stories, and then once we sit, let us also be very sincere that we're not just here to have a talk shop, but then we really want to make sure that we change children's perspective, or the world, at least from our own perspective. I think it's also very much important for us to check our consciences when we come to these conferences. For us that are coming from far, are we actually representing? What is it that we're taking back? It's not just the glamour, but we should really make sure that things that we speak too are very close to our hearts, and then help change the world in our way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahid. And thank you to all of our panelists. I'd like to bring this session to a close with a few reflections. It seems that in other sessions I've attended of this forum, there's often been a magic wand question at the end. It seems to me that there is no magic wand. We are in an era which is characterized by compounding crises. We've talked about COVID, we've talked about climate change, we've talked about conflict, the 3 Cs. We've also heard last year that there is a crisis of multilateralism that came out very strongly from the UN Secretary General in our new common agenda. We heard this morning talk about the work of the group of young people who worked on our future agenda, which is the young people's response to that. We are confronted with shrinking civic space around us for academics, civil society. We are confronted with economic downturn, the criminalization of poverty. There's no magic wand. But what there is hard graft characterized by exactly what you described, Shahid, which is genuine commitment to inclusion, genuine commitment to really listening to others, and sometimes being uncomfortable in that listening. It does make us uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to listen to stories of people who have lived through violence. But when we listen to those stories, let us not, as you say, listen to them from a point of voyeurism, and from a point of as you said, a sort of the drama or the TV show. No, let us harness the rage that it rightfully produces inside us in order to come together and to create change. And this is how I'd like to end this session today, on the message that when we are confronted with the compounding crises, let us channel our rage towards a collective vision for hope. Because if we get it right now, if we get intergenerational partnerships right at the midway point to 2030, what will we achieve? And what will the post-2030 agenda look like if we get it right now? The people that we're working with now are going to write that agenda. And this is why now is the time. Thank you all for being with us.